Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's being patient with me as I'm adjusting to my new normal. If you're unfamiliar what I mean by that, please go back and rewatch my life update video. However, if you don't care, let's jump right into the topic today. Today, we're going to be discussing once again our favorite fossil fuel fanboy, Alex Epstein. Now, my previous video that I did on him seems to have ruffled a few feathers because evidently directly reading his tweets and responding to the content in those tweets seems to have led me into accidentally strawmanning dear old Alex here. So for all of his defenders, rest assured that today we're going to be looking at a video and responding to the things he says as opposed to the things he tweets. Now, if you would like to go back and watch my previous video on him, I will link that in the pinned comment down below, so please feel free to go back and catch up on Alex and the things that he seems to stand for. For those of you that don't know or don't have time to go back and watch another video, Alex Epstein is the CEO and founder of a pro-fossil fuel think tank and the author of a book that I have not read yet. However, as soon as I get a secondhand copy, I do look forward to reading and responding to here on the channel. So look forward to that. Just don't know when that'll happen. The book in question is titled A Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Well, today we're going to be responding to a video that Alex did, not on his own YouTube channel, because his own YouTube channel, the videos on that are 45 minutes to an hour long, and I don't have time to sift through that right now. However, that will come in the future once my life does settle down and I do have time. No, today we're going to be responding to a video from July 29th, 2019, so almost 2 years ago at the time this video is being filmed, that he filmed for PragerU. Now, those of you that don't know, PragerU stands for Prager University, and what they are essentially is a website and a YouTube channel that promotes pro-right-wing talking points in a sort of educational seeming manner. For the most part, if you look at a lot of their videos, they're little more than a right-wing propaganda mill, but I do say that at the risk of poisoning the well here a little bit, but they're pretty well known for being a fairly big propaganda machine and pushing very right-wing talking points. However, they do use the word university and do tend to have fairly logical sounding arguments that do sound academic when you first listen to them. So the video in question that we're actually looking at today is about the Green New Deal. And I've chosen this video because it is relevant to things that I think are important, and Alex does seem to mention things like the Green New Deal a lot on his Twitter still, and it is relevant in this day and age. So I also have not watched this video prior to filming the one you are watching, so the video we're going to be watching is going to be my raw reactions here. And I felt that this would be a fun little exercise because I have already created videos on the Green New Deal, and I will link the one in question in the pinned comment as well if you are interested in hearing more about my thoughts and feelings on the Green New Deal. So without further ado, let's hear what Alex here has to say about the Green New Deal.
We face an existential threat. Life as we know it is on the line. We have 12 short years to change everything, or it's game over. This is the terrifying scenario that's used by many leading politicians to justify a Green New Deal, an unprecedented increase in government power focused on the energy industry. The core idea of a Green New Deal is that government should rapidly prohibit the use of fossil fuel energy and impose 100% renewable energy, mostly solar and wind.
Okay, so first of all, you opened up with a very scary thing that has been pushed by the right wing a lot in regards to the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is not just about energy. The Green New Deal is actually about bettering the lives of people in general, and energy happens to be part of that. But you know what? Perhaps I should let you talk some more. And For the record, renewable energy is not limited to solar and wind, and it does get very tiring hearing that this side of the argument never even addresses other renewable energy sources. And it's a little scary when you say things like the government's going to completely take over the energy grid and get rid of fossil fuels and replace them with these renewables. That's not exactly what it says, so it's a little disingenuous that you're saying that's what it says. But let's move on here.
This may sound appealing, but consider what it would entail. Today, 80% of the energy Americans use to heat their homes, farm their land, run their factories, and drive their cars comes from fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Only 3.4% comes from solar and wind.
So those are actually very accurate statistics. However, if you actually look at them in context, you'll realize that the energy that's available to us right now, since the United States has not transitioned into a renewable energy grid, is primarily fossil fuel based. So of course, most of our energy that goes to power our houses, run our cars, all that stuff is going to come from fossil fuels for the most part and not renewable energy. So this is sort of a non-issue talking point because of course before we move to green energy, we're going to still be relying heavily on fossil fuels. This is presented as a gotcha in most cases. I'm not entirely certain at this point that that's what we're going for here, but it's really not the gotcha that this side wants to say it is.
Despite decades of government subsidies and mandates to encourage their use. The reason we don't use much sunlight and wind as energy is that they are unreliable fuels that only work when the sun shines and the wind blows. That's why no town, city, or country has ever come close to 100% or even 50% solar and wind.
That's because no one's suggesting that we rely 100 or 50% on solar and wind. You ignore the fact that there are actually countries that do use, or at least one country that is primarily renewable energy. It's just not primarily solar and wind. Reducing renewable energy down to just solar and wind is, at best case scenario, irresponsible of you to be presenting your argument this way, or worst case scenario, deceptive. And frankly, I don't feel very generous today, so I would probably lean towards deceptive. But let's move on.
And yet, Green New Deal proponents say they can do the impossible.
No, they don't. The Green New Deal doesn't say 100% solar and wind, and if you were being genuine with your argument, you would know that. But you're probably banking on the fact that your audience isn't going to go actually read the content of the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal promotes renewable energy, but that's not just limited to solar and wind. Green energy also includes things like geothermal. Wave energy is an exciting new technology that's being researched, and a smorgasbord of other things as well. And this whole talking point about how it doesn't work when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, there's a whole field of research working on how to store that energy, because that tends to produce a lot of energy. And it's a bit disingenuous of this whole argument latching on to solar and wind. Nobody is saying power the whole country on just solar and wind alone.
If only we give the government control of the energy industry and control of major users of energy, such as the transportation industry, manufacturing, and agriculture. All of this is justified by the need to do something about the existential threat of rising CO2 levels. We're told on a daily basis that prestigious organizations like the United Nations have predicted mass destruction and death if we don't get off fossil fuels.
Because that's what the data shows us. Why are you so distrustful of things like the United Nations? Why are you so distrustful of the science that is agreed upon by over 90% of the leading scientists in this field? Why does that scare you so much? Is it because you line your pockets with money from fossil fuels? Oh, but perhaps that's a little mean of me to nitpick. Anyway, the science does say that if we don't do something about these greenhouse gases, if we don't do something about these emissions, we are going to be headed to a crisis. Yes, that is scary language to use, but that is the harsh reality of where we are right now. And it is absolutely disingenuous of people to be saying that we're just fear mongering, which, granted, he hasn't said that, but the language does imply that. And I personally have also been accused of fear mongering. So I don't think that's a very far leap, but again, for transparency's sake, Alex has not said that we're just fear-mongering. However, his language has implied it. And the auditory eye rolls you can hear in some of his words when he is talking about the existential crisis, because it is an existential crisis, is a little frustrating to hear.
What we're not told is that such predictions have a decades-long track record of getting it wrong. And by wrong, I mean completely missing the dartboard wrong.
Sometimes predictions are wrong. It doesn't change the fact that we are seeing this alarming trend. And just because we have managed to somehow be pushing off or somehow have missed the mark on what the Earth can actually sustain, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole field is bogus and that what we're pushing for is bad. It just means that, yeah, some predictions have been wrong. So what?
For example, in 1989, the Associated Press reported a United Nations prediction that entire nations could be wiped off the face of the Earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000.
Yeah, and we have better data now than we did in the 80s. So what? We have better instruments, we have better data to work with, we have better models. So what? One prediction from the 80s was wrong. We are seeing these increasing sea levels. We are seeing threats to these coastal towns and island nations. Just because they're not completely underwater yet doesn't necessarily mean that this is all a load of bullshit.
We're now 2 decades past 2000. We're not missing any nations, and human beings are living longer, healthier, and wealthier lives than ever before. But aren't things bound to get worse? Haven't scientists established that CO2 is a greenhouse gas with a warming influence on the planet? Yes, but that's only a small part of the big picture. Although CO2 causes some warming, it's much less significant than we've been told. Since we started using significant amounts of fossil fuels in the middle of the 19th century, we've increased the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere from 0.03% to 0.04%, which correlates with an average temperature increase of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
These are global averages, and when you present it as small numbers like that, yes, it does seem like these very small numbers that are complete non-issues. However, a global average is a big deal, and you're not presenting the data that shows the destruction done to ecosystems, and not just the ones that you can see that are terrestrial, like the Arctic and the Antarctic. The damage that's being done in these aquatic and marine ecosystems, such as on coral reefs, are a part of this, because CO2 not only raises the temperature as it is a greenhouse gas, and it does contribute to the overall warming of temperature trends globally. It also gets sunk into the oceans. The ocean gets acidified because water is a sink for gases such as CO2, and one of the reactions that ends up happening when CO2 does dissolve into the water is that it produces carbonic acid. Now, we also see things that kind of cascade through, like these massive changes in weather patterns. that has to do with what's going on and the damage that we are doing as humans with our unchecked emissions to the planet. But let's move on.
It also correlates with significant global greening because CO2 is plant food. All of this is far from unprecedented territory for our planet, which has existed with at least 10 times today's CO2 levels and a 25-degree warmer average temperature.
So the issue is not that CO2 is plant food and global greening. We also have massive deforestation, and the current biomass we have that fixes carbon is not going to be able to keep up with the carbon that we're emitting. I don't know why he likes to hang on to this argument that CO2 is plant food, and so us emitting CO2 is actually good, because we just don't have enough greenery to deal with that. But let's hear what he's going to say about our prehistoric CO2 levels, because I'm sure that there's nothing I can pick apart with that argument at all.
What is truly unprecedented, though, is how safe we are from climate. The International Disaster Database, a nonpartisan organization that tracks deaths from climate-related causes, such as extreme heat, floods, storms, and drought, shows that such deaths have been plummeting as CO2 emissions have been rising. How is this possible?
Correlation doesn't imply causation, and that's true here too. Just because these deaths have decreased at the moment, there are also data where we're seeing heat sickness and things like that increase as temperatures increase. And it does seem like you're cherry picking a little bit, because yes, it is absolutely correct that the Earth used to have an atmosphere with much more CO2 in it. Actually, life began anaerobically, meaning we didn't have a whole lot of oxygen, and aerobic life only formed after carbon dioxide and water was reacted in anaerobic life to increase oxygen levels that would have been fairly toxic to the first life. And yes, the Earth at one time did have much higher temperatures. That has nothing to do with the life we see now in the ecosystems and how the Earth is currently evolved to deal with what we're seeing. The issue here is that we're having CO2 and temperature levels rise in a way that the life on Earth is not going to be able to adapt appropriately, and we are heading towards catastrophe potentially. And that is a fundamental threat to humans as well. So this whole argument that because prehistorically the Earth had X amount of CO2 and the temperature was X amount higher than it is now, it's not necessarily relevant to this argument, because the real question we need to be asking is, yeah, this was the case billions of years ago or millions of years ago, depending on what data point he's pulling from. The issue is now, can the ecosystems, can the biosphere on Earth adapt to these changing levels now, and what damage is being done? Since it can, without a shadow of a doubt, be linked back to human activity. But let's move on, because he's going to tell us how this is possible now.
Because of the fossil fuel energy that emitted the CO2, which has empowered us to climate-proof our environment with heating, air conditioning, sturdy buildings, mass irrigation, and weather warning systems.
Climate proofing? Having my fucking air conditioner is climate proofing the environment? No, having my fucking air conditioner running because it's 120 degrees some days at my house is so that I don't get heat sickness, because I'm very prone to heat stroke. And I also would like my dogs to be able to be cool because I care about them. This climate proofing that you're talking about with heating, cooling, sturdy buildings, weather warning, it's to keep people safe. And you saying that the fossil fuel energy empowered us to do that is a little disingenuous. Yes, fossil fuels have made it possible for us to have the power that runs these things. However, empowered us to do it. It's not that we wouldn't have found a way to do it without fossil fuels. It's just that fossil fuels were the technology of the day and the technology that we have relied on to get us where we are. So, no, you saying this, therefore fossil fuels make us safer is not necessarily true, but it's not necessarily incorrect either. It's just a little disingenuous.
Fossil fuel energy has not taken a naturally safe climate and made it unnaturally dangerous.
Nobody is saying fossil fuel energy took a naturally safe climate and made it unnaturally dangerous. What we're saying is the emissions from unchecked burning of fossil fuels is increasing the rate of change here, and it's trending towards fairly alarming territory. The climate was not safe prior to fossil fuels, and it's not safe now just because of fossil fuels. The climate patterns are something that, as humans, we can't really control. However, we can recognize the effects that we are having on our planet and try to mitigate those effects. And again, nobody is saying that fossil fuels took a safe climate and made it unnaturally dangerous. That is a nonsensical argument.
It's taken our naturally dangerous climate and made it unnaturally safe. Fossil fuels are not an existential threat.
It is also not correct to say that fossil fuels took our naturally unsafe climate and made it unnaturally safe, because the burning of fossil fuels is actually lending a hand to the destruction of these predictable climate patterns and lending a hand to this unchecked warming and this unchecked disturbance to these weather patterns. The burning of fossil fuels is lending to what is giving us these alarming signs. So, one, it is absolutely incorrect to say that we had a naturally safe climate and fossil fuels made it unnaturally dangerous. That is not correct. Nobody is making that argument. But it is also incorrect to say that fossil fuels made our naturally dangerous climate unnaturally safe.
They're an existential resource because they increase something much more important than the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, the level of human empowerment. Increased life expectancy, income, health, leisure time, and education are all tightly linked to increased access to fossil fuels.
Yes, increased well-being is demonstrably linked to increased resources, and fossil fuels have been a massive resource source in the past. Nobody is saying it wasn't. Nobody is saying that fossil fuels weren't objectively a good thing to push human society into the world it's in now. However, it's not shitting on that to say that we need to now go back and think about the damage that we as a species have done to the world. It's not a bad thing to say, hey, can we be a little better for this planet and perhaps shift to a renewable source of energy that's not going to give off these massive emissions every single second of every single day? Is it a bad thing for us to want to transition to something that's going to be better for the planet while maintaining our quality of life? No, it's not. And nobody is saying that the fact that fossil fuels helped us get to where we are is a bad thing. But it's also not a bad thing for us to want to change to be better while maintaining where we are.
Does this mean that we shouldn't look for lower carbon energy alternatives? Of course not. But the alternatives should lead us toward more abundant, more reliable power, not less.
Our alternatives are not going to lead us to less power. And the fact that this side of the argument keeps saying that it will entirely ignores a massive body of research currently going on to ensure that when we shift to sustainable energy, we maintain a level of living. And it ignores the fact that renewable energy is not just solar and wind. And that gets really frustrating.
The most promising form of alternative energy is not unreliable solar and wind, but reliable carbon-free nuclear energy.
I've also done a video all about nuclear and why it is not necessarily safe. Nuclear is not a fossil fuel. It is absolutely true that it is technically carbon neutral, but it's not sustainable, it's not renewable, and it's not safe. But let's hear what he has to say. Based on his tweets about it in the past, I can kind of guess what he's going to say, but I don't want to jump the gun here. For any of you interested, I will also link my nuclear energy video in the pinned comment.
Sweden gets 40% of its electricity from nuclear, France over 70%.
So, what does the energy grid in other countries on nuclear have to do with what we're trying to do here in the United States? I feel like you're trying to prime for saying something along the lines of, in the United States, nuclear needs to be decriminalized, since that is a tweet that you've put out, but I don't want to jump the gun, so let's continue.
While nuclear energy is smeared as unsafe, it has actually been demonstrated by study after study to be the safest form of energy ever created.
The issue with nuclear is that just because the majority of reactors are safe under the current technology, is that if there is a failure, it's a massive failure, and that the repercussions are very great. Yes, technically nuclear is safe. Personally, I don't balk at the idea of nuclear. However, there is a massive amount of pollution for the mining of the fuel source for nuclear. And if there is a meltdown, Chernobyl, doesn't that ring a bell? Yeah, nuclear power plants are technically safe. But the fact that there is still a threat there if something were to go wrong, nuclear power plants are still built by fallible humans. And no matter how safe someone tries to be, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to check all the boxes and manage to be completely safe.
And yet, Green New Deal proponents who say that we have 12 years to save the planet from rising CO2 levels vigorously oppose nuclear, in addition to all fossil fuel use. By opposing every affordable, abundant, reliable form of energy, the Green New Deal won't protect us from an existential threat. It is an existential threat. I'm Alex Epstein, author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels for Prager University.
Okay, so here's the thing. You're completely ignoring the fact that the Green New Deal is not only about energy. It's also not saying that the government takes over the energy grid entirely, which frankly is not necessarily a bad idea. There's no reason why a necessary utility like that should be managed by private companies, because when it is, you get things like the Texas fiasco this past winter. But I digress on that one. The thing about nuclear is that no, it's not necessarily super safe. The fact that if there is something that goes wrong, and when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong, that is a thing that people need to be aware of. It's also, while it is net zero, nuclear also presents this massive crisis of pollution for mining, for the uranium, which is a big deal because it pollutes waterways and also destroys ecosystems. That is a big deal. And I know specifically in Arizona, that has been a big problem with mining for fuel for nuclear energy in areas that affect frickin' drinking water. So the Green New Deal is not just about energy, and it's very upsetting that this video has watered it down to just be that. The Green New Deal is about making life better in general. It plays on the New Deal that pulled us out of the Great Depression. It created jobs and helped improve infrastructure. And the Green New Deal is playing on that because if it's successful, it will do the same thing. However, I have talked in length about that in my other video that I will link down below. Now, I don't want this to get too long at this point, but for the most part, this video has been throwing a lot of statistics at you that are kind of taken out of context, or in reality, don't really address talking points. So, yes, fossil fuels have gotten us to where we are today. I have benefited from fossil fuels, since for some reason people try to say that I say I haven't, but every day I've benefited from fossil fuels. Does that make me a hypocrite? No, because I am bound by the technology of the day and age. So, yes, I benefit from fossil fuels. That's just how it is right now, and that's okay. And the thing is, I'm just going to end up repeating all my talking points here. It's just, this whole video has been saying that the Green New Deal and supporters of it are saying things that they're just not, and it is disingenuous. But I digress. Do you have any thoughts and comments down that you would like me to know? Please pop them in the comment section down below, and I will gladly read them. If you want to tell me that I sound like a whiny teenager, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm lying about my education, pop those in the comment section down below too, because I do genuinely enjoy reading every single comment. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane V. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.